Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro revenge story. I'm a die-hard Seahawks fanatic, the kind who rocks face paint and starts pre-gaming at 6 a.m. on game days. A couple of years ago, my beloved Hawks made a deep playoff run and reached the Super Bowl. At the time, I was working at a marketing agency with several major client accounts under my belt. One client in particular, a huge tech company, knew my Seahawks obsession. I was the lead on their account, and we had grown pretty tight over countless meetings, pitches, and late nights at the office. The client manager, let's call him Dave, had scored a pair of Primo Company seats to the big game. As an appreciation gift for my hard work, he passed those golden tickets to Brad, a smarmy, self-important partner at our firm. The plan was for Brad to surprise me with them. Well, the Super Bowl came and went. We lost a heartbreaker, but that's beside the point. At our next meeting, Dave casually mentioned, "Hey man, how was the game? I heard someone else ended up in your seats." I just stared at him blankly. "What game?" Dave looked confused. "The Super Bowl. I gave Brad a pair of tickets for you as a thank you gift." I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Dave seemed stunned and told me to discreetly ask around about it. Back at the office, I found out through the grapevine that Brad had gifted those coveted Super Bowl tickets to one of his other clients as a firm perk. I was livid. These weren't just any seats. They were 30-yard line spots to watch my Seahawks play for a championship. Under normal circumstances, I might have let it slide to keep the peace, but not for something this huge. While I was tempted to confront that with Brad directly, I realized Dave had been the one to notice my absence at the game. If I let him take the lead, there wouldn't be any blowback on me. I texted Dave, "Hey man, thanks again for thinking of me with those seats. Looks like they ended up going to another client though." His response was immediate. "Are you kidding me?" Followed by, "Don't say anything else, let me handle this." Dave looped me in on his master plan. A few days later, we were summoned for a meeting at the client's office. They requested Brad's presence too, which wasn't that unusual. Little did that slimeball know, Dave had cooked up the most beautifully awkward ambush imaginable. When we arrived at the conference room, it was the usual crew plus an unfamiliar woman, maybe early 30s. Dave introduced her as Stephanie, VP from another division. She'll be sitting in. "Hey, John. You guys must already know each other from the Super Bowl." Stephanie played it perfectly. "Oh, did we meet there? I'm so sorry. I don't recall." Dave feigned confusion. "What? Steph, how much did you drink? They were sitting right next to you." He looked at me. "Sorry, Dave, I wasn't actually there. You must be thinking of someone else." At this point, Brad was visibly squirming, trying to fabricate an excuse. He stammered, But Stephanie spoke over him. "No, the guys from XYZ Corp had those other seats. By the way, why did we comp tickets to them? We're not working on anything together, are we?" She knew damn well we had no real business ties to that company. Brad let out another before Dave cut him off. "Brad, I gave you those tickets for John as a thank you gift." The guy turned beet red. "Oh, well, he couldn't make it, so he must have passed them to someone else." He gave me a pleading look to bail him out. Dave just smirked at me. I played dumb. "What are you talking about? Dave, did you actually get me Super Bowl tickets?" Dave raised his voice. "Brad, those were a personal gift to John from me. Did you give my tickets away to another client?" "Maybe there was a mix-up at the office," Brad mumbled pathetically. Silence. You could hear a pin drop as Dave just glared at him. Finally, Dave closed his notebook and laptop. "I think this meeting is over. John, let me take you to lunch. Looks like I owe you a thank you gift. Stephanie, you're welcome to join Brad. Head on back. We need to reevaluate our relationship." When Brad tried to protest, Stephanie shut it down. "I don't think that's a good idea," she told him flatly, before asking reception to escort him out. The second that elevator closed, we cracked up laughing. Turned out Stephanie was just an employee who had agreed to play the confused VP for Dave's sting operation. She was actually a fellow Hawks fan and ended up joining us for a hilarious celebratory lunch. In the car, I got a frantic text from Brad, pleading for me to protect the company and saying we could discuss it when I returned. My one-word response, "Sure." Dave told me to wait a bit, then let Brad know. 1. He would be invoiced for the resale value of the Super Bowl tickets, easily over $10K each, plus the extravagant lunch tab to be paid immediately. 2. A direct apology was required. 3. A written apology to the company for theft. 4. Dave would only work with me or another partner going forward, not Brad. This whole fiasco ended up making me look great with the other partners for trying to salvage the account despite being the victim. Dave transferred to a different partner, so Brad lost that profit cut. And yes, Brad had to pay those invoices from his own pockets. Ouch. In hindsight, what was that idiot thinking? Did he actually believe Dave wouldn't notice me not showing up and thanking him? Ultimately, the well was poisoned for me at that firm thanks to Brad and his massive ego. I left a few months later for greener pastures. Dave ended up severing ties with the agency a year after that whole mess. These days, he works with a buddy of mine at a rival firm. Still bummed I missed seeing my Hawks win the Super Bowl in person, but maybe they'll make it back soon. The next one is an entitled people story. When my brother passed away unexpectedly 2 years ago at the young age of 35, it absolutely devastated my family. As his only living relative, I inherited his small but cozy house located just down the street from where I lived. It was a bittersweet feeling going through his belongings and preparing to sell the place, but I knew my brother would have wanted me to find a nice family to enjoy it as much as he did. That plan got derailed when a new neighbor moved in next door to my brother's old house. The guy's name was Daniel, and he gave me bad vibes from the moment we met. He just had this arrogant, entitled air about him that immediately rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I tried to be neighborly and welcome him to the community. Boy, was that a mistake. Within a week, Daniel started snooping around my brother's property, looking in the windows and checking if the doors were locked. One day, I caught him in the backyard poking around the shed. When I confronted him, he gave me some bogus excuse about thinking he left a tool back there. I told him in no uncertain terms that this was private property, and he needed to keep off it. Daniel backed off for a bit after that, but it wasn't long before he was up to his old tricks. Only this time, he wasn't just looking, he was making changes. I drove by one day and saw that he had repainted the front door. A few weeks later, I found new curtains in the living room windows that definitely were not my style or my brother's. The last straw came when I stopped by to pick up some paperwork and found Daniel doing renovations in the kitchen. He had the audacity to tell me he was fixing the place up before he moved in. I was seeing red, but somehow managed to keep my cool and firmly tell him to get out immediately before I called the cops. Daniel tried pleading ignorance, saying there must be some misunderstanding about who owned the place, but I knew he was just playing dumb. I had made it crystal clear multiple times that this was my property, and he was encroaching without permission. Still, he refused to leave, babbling on about how it was fate that brought him to this house, and he belonged here more than I ever did. The guy was clearly delusional, but he wasn't going to be deterred by mere words. So I followed through on my threat and called the cops to escort him off the premises. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of Daniel's ridiculous crusade to claim my brother's house. A month later, I was served with legal papers from Daniel suing me for ownership of the property. I was stunned when I read his trumped-up lawsuit, alleging that my brother had promised to leave the house to Daniel, and I was unlawfully keeping it from him. This guy had some real nerve, I'll give him that. But there was no way I was letting him get away with this nonsense. I lawyered up and prepared to fight him every step of the way. At the court hearing, I provided the deed, bank statements, and my brother's will showing very clearly that I was the sole inheritor. Meanwhile, Daniel had zero evidence to back up his preposterous claim. The judge saw right through Daniel's act and dismissed the case immediately. But I wasn't done with him yet. No, this delusional thief had put me through way too much stress and hassle. I decided to hit him where it hurt, his wallet. I sued Daniel for the cost of repairing the damage he did while illegally trespassing and attempting to take over the property. I also sued for emotional distress caused by his harassment over the many months he kept trying to steal my brother's home. In the end, I won a judgment of over $20,000 in damages, which Daniel was ordered to pay or face garnished wages and liens on his assets. It still didn't make up for all the aggravation he put me through, but it felt good to see him finally face consequences. The look on Daniel's face when the verdict came back still brings a smile to my face. He went ghostly pale when the judge read out the huge dollar amount he now owed me. I think that's when it finally dawned on him that he wasn't as clever as he thought. If he had just respected boundaries and kept his hands off what wasn't his, he could have avoided that massive penalty. But his arrogance and disregard for the law landed him in a huge financial hole. I heard from mutual neighbors that Daniel had to take out a second mortgage just to pay me the money he owed. Last I heard, his credit was wrecked too. I can't say I feel sorry for the guy. He brought it all on himself with his delusions of taking my brother's home. As for me, I'm just glad to finally have justice and be able to move on. My brother can now rest in peace, knowing his beloved home will go to a deserving family, not that contemptible scoundrel next door. This painful chapter is finally closed thanks to the court recognizing Daniel's legal mistake and making him take responsibility. Don't mess with what's not yours, people. The law doesn't take kindly to delusional fools who try to unlawfully seize someone else's property. The next one is a petty revenge story. I, a 23-year-old woman, worked at a call center approximately a year ago. It was a small call center with a business casual dress code policy. For reference, I am 5'3" and have a pear shape with big thighs and a C-cup chest. I am on the curvier side, but still big. I had always been very insecure and had body image issues, but then I became very confident. I was always very nice and smiling to people, as well as dressing in clothes that flattered my shape. Yes, they were a little tight, but there was no cleavage or short dresses or skirts. I don't know if it's conceited of me to say, but I have come a long way since being the shy, baggy-clothed duff from my high school. Well, there's this woman who is well into her 40s, who is also big. She would come in wearing Crocs, baggy pajama pants, super baggy shirts, and with out-of-bed hair. She would always stare at me almost angrily or talk about me as well. I never cared because I had gotten used to it, until she started becoming bolder by coming up to me and nitpicking my clothes. For reference, the first time she came up to me, I was wearing a long cardigan and a tube-top jumpsuit. I have a bigger bottom than my chest, so it came as a surprise when she said my breasts were out and that I needed to cover up, as she proceeded to tug at my jumpsuit. I cried in the bathroom because of how embarrassed I was, and went to my supervisor about this, asking if I was out of dress code. She said no and said she'd talk to her. Mind you, I didn't know they were besties, so I went about my shift. This happened 2 more times with no resolution. My last straw came when she started making a scene in front of my coworkers. I was wearing a knee-length skirt with a sweater. As I'm talking to a coworker and others are around, she comes up and says, "Again? It's as if you're asking for attention." Confused, I look around and ask what she means. She points at my legs and says I'm practically naked because my skirt had lifted an inch up from my knee from shifting around in my seat. So I stand up and say out loud for everybody to hear, "Why do you constantly pick on me? Is it really my clothes, or is it something different like the color of my skin? I'm really curious because you constantly mess with me and aren't even worried about your agents." She was a supervisor for a neighboring company cubicle, but constantly by our desks to try and flirt with the male workers. She then started stuttering and darting her eyes around. Realizing everybody started looking and standing from their desks, she quickly said, No, it's not like that. I'm just trying to watch out for you. You know, big girl to big girl. I just wasn't sure if you were okay with what you were wearing." I say clearly I'm here working, and I have my own supervisor to let me know if I am out of dress code. After that, it was nothing but smiles and constantly offering me snacks. Sorry for the long post, but it still makes me chuckle to this day. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Okay, so a little backstory first. I am a 20-year-old college student full-time and doing 23 plus hours a week on top of classes to make ends meet. I live paycheck to paycheck and have a car was paying off. I used to work at a McDonald's in my hometown, but since I moved to live on campus, which was 45 minutes away from my old job, and I wasn't willing to make the commute, so I decided to apply and got accepted to a small sandwich shop 10 minutes from my college, which was a blessing. It started out great, plenty of hours, easy work, fast days, till the old manager decided to switch stores. The new manager was one of the biggest Karens you have ever met. Like, really bad, and when I say bad, I really mean it. She completely changed the procedures and made things so much worse. And when I'd have to stay over sometimes 2-3 hours after closing, she'd burst in the next day yelling, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop staying later, you have to be out by 8:30. We won't pay you for any time past then." I had no choice because the list she gave me to do, to close the store alone every night, may I add, was extremely time-consuming, especially with no help. I was expected to stop serving at 8 and do 5 people's worth of work in 30 minutes. It simply wasn't doable. Hearing I wasn't going to be paid for time I worked, time I spent making sure everything was done on the list before I left, otherwise I'd be fired for not doing all of it would go unpaid, as well as I'd be fired if I stayed longer than 8:30. There was no winning. On top of that, the moment management switched, they decided they were giving people too many hours and cut me to only 3 hours a week. That went on for 4 weeks till I decided enough was enough. $45 work, weeks wasn't even worth putting in the time and effort to even show up. So on one of my weekends, I was with my parents off campus. I was due to work that day. 3 hours, of course, my only day that week. I was shopping near said sandwich shop. It's located inside a Walmart. My mom and I were discussing for the last week how I should just quit since it seems they are trying to fire me without saying they are firing me, wanting me to leave on my own so they wouldn't need to fill out paperwork. Right then and there, I decided, you know what? Forget this job and forget my entitled Karen boss. I sent her a text that I quit on the spot and to not expect me to come in that night for my shift. She texted me back ranting about how since I'm not giving her a 2-week notice, I'll never be able to work at one of those sandwich shops again. At that point, I didn't care. I already had to give up my brand new car of only 4 months because I couldn't pay my loan and insurance. It was a nice car. A white shimmery 2016 Hyundai Sonata. I loved that thing. I told her at some point that week I'd try to get the brand new uniform that, funny enough, they had just given to me the week prior, a whole 3-1-2 months after I started working there. But I warned her my classes run till right before closing. I didn't know when I'd be able to do so. She texted back in what I could only imagine the snarkiest tone possible. "No, I really need that uniform back tomorrow." I told her I'm sorry, but that may not be possible due to my school schedule, and I'm not willing to ditch a class to drop off a few pieces of clothing. She said, "No, you will bring it back tomorrow. Don't even try to lie to me. You were seen in store the day you quit. No excuses." Okay then, she said, no excuses. I didn't want to go into an argument with her over it. And knowing she herself would be closing that day, and my classes ended at 8 exactly, I happily complied. I made sure I'd arrive right as she was closing the lock on the gate. I was bringing the clothes in my reusable shopping bag. I had no throwaway bags, and since she can't take and claim my bag as her own, I was just going to give her the clothes one piece at a time. Knowing she would have to carry them out of the store, juggling them back home, made me happy. When it came time to deliver my uniform to her, all the stars seemed to align perfectly. I arrived at 8:30, caught her on the way out with the outfit not even in a reusable bag to begin with. As an extra touch of sweet, unplanned irony, it was raining outside, hard rain. The sidewalks, I guess, were extra slippery and muddy, because on my way in, I slipped and landed chest first into the mud. I was mostly spared, though, because the clothes were there to break my fall and absorb most of the filth, dropping off the muddy, loose clothes, seeing her reaction, watching her stomp, her feet wrench in disgust, holding the clothes 10 feet away from her body, huff and puff, marching out of the store in pure shock and disbelief. She didn't even have words for me. It was the sweetest revenge I had ever seen. This did mean I had to buy a whole new set of clothes and change in the Walmart bathroom, but it was all worth it to see her reaction in the end. After I had returned to my dorm that evening, I sent her a text saying simply, "Enjoy," and I blocked her number. Safe to say karma really did pay out on my end. The next one is an entitled people story. I work at an archery store, and this story revolves around fixing a broken bow. For context, if you shoot a bow without an arrow, it's called a dry fire and it's very bad. For a compound bow, the damage can be catastrophic. This surprises a lot of people, which is why dry fires are usually caused by beginners or family members who see the bow and play with it, not knowing any better. Uncle did this to nephew's bow, but luckily the damage wasn't too bad. The only thing that needed replacing was the string, so that's what we quoted nephew for. He was going to get uncle to pay for it, but he figured while he was getting a new string, he'd also order some new accessories, so he asked us to add them to the quote. He said he'd pay for them and collect them when the string was ready. When the string arrived, we let him know. The day after that, Uncle called to pay for it. To my surprise, he called to pay for the whole order, but there was definitely funny business going on. This was the conversation. You, I'm calling to pay an invoice. Me, sure, what's the invoice number? You, it's X for $900. Me, oh, you're the uncle. You, yep, so I'm here to pay the $900. Me, you're paying the whole invoice? That's generous. You, yeah, well, I feel bad, so here's the money. After I took the payment, he asked me to include all of the broken pieces when we ship the bow back. Me, okay, sure, but it's only the string that's being replaced. You, what about the limbs? Me, we're only replacing the string, nothing else was broken. Oh, but it says, right here on the invoice, replace limbs $800, replace string $100. Me, I don't know what you're looking at. The invoice here says, accessories $800, replace string $100. You, what are you talking about? That's not right. Me, no, it's right. I'm looking at the invoice right now. You, oh no, did I just pay someone else's invoice? Me, no, our invoice numbers match, plus you confirmed you're the uncle. This is the right invoice. You, silent. Me, your nephew purchased some accessories as well. That's why I was surprised you wanted to pay for it all. You, there are no accessories on this invoice, just replace limbs and replace string. Why is yours different? I was a little confused at this as well, but after some silence, I realized what must have happened. Me, I think your nephew photoshopped the invoice. It was like we both came to that realization together after a moment's silence. I was honestly disgusted, but the uncle more so. He hung up to berate his nephew. About an hour later, the nephew called and asked what I told his uncle. I replied, your uncle asked me to send the broken limbs back to him. I told him we aren't replacing the limbs, and he figured it out from there. His justification was horrendous. He said, yeah, well, he stopped giving me birthday presents after I turned 18, so I figured he owed me. I couldn't believe what I heard. This guy thought he was entitled to receive birthday presents to such an extent that he was willing to scam a family member out of $800 to make up for the presents he didn't get. After that, I called the uncle back and told him what his nephew said. He was not impressed. He then requested that I refund the payment, which I agreed to, after which I withheld fulfilling the invoice until it was paid for again. The next day, the nephew called. He asked me to remove the accessories from the invoice, which I did, and he paid for the string himself. I didn't hear from the uncle again, but considering the nephew ended up paying for the repair, I can only imagine he got his justice. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.